All right, today we're diving into Austria. And you might think you know it. The Alps, Mozart, Vienna, but trust me, its real story is one of the most dramatic transformations you'll find anywhere in European history. So let's get into it.
When you think of Austria, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Probably the soaring Alps, right? Or maybe the melodies of Mozart, the imperial grandeur of Vienna. And look, you're not wrong. But that's just scratching the surface of a much bigger, way more complex picture.
And that is the central question for us today. How on earth did this pretty small alpine nation once rule a massive multi-ethnic empire right at the heart of Europe? We're going to trace that journey from a sprawling empire that defined Central Europe for centuries through total collapse to the prosperous, peaceful nation we know today.
Okay, so let's rewind. Our story really kicks off with Austria as an absolute superpower. We're talking about the heart of the legendary Habsburg dynasty. For centuries, Vienna, well, it wasn't just the capital of Austria. It was, for all intents and purposes, one of the capitals of the world.
Okay, take a look at this timeline. The thing that should just jump out at you is the sheer timescale we're dealing with here. The Habsburgs' grip on Austria started way back in 1278 and lasted for almost 650 years. I mean, just think about that. They went from controlling this little duchy to ruling one of the most powerful empires on the planet, basically dictating the fate of Central Europe.
And this empire, wow, it was incredibly diverse. It's so important to get this. It wasn't Austrian in the way we think of it today. It was this huge mosaic, a collection of totally different peoples, languages, cultures, all crammed together under one crown. I mean, can you imagine trying to govern a state like that? You got German speakers in Vienna, Hungarians in Budapest, Czechs in Prague, Poles in Krakow. You get the idea. This diversity was its great strength for a time, but it also turned out to be its Achilles heel.
And right here, this slide just slams home the incredible scale of that change. You go from a massive great power with over 50 million people to a small landlocked republic of around 9 million. It's just a staggering transformation. So what on earth happened?
Well, what happened was the 20th century. And for Austria, the first half of that century was just a relentless, brutal series of crises that would literally tear its old world apart and leave the country fighting for its very survival.
Just let's pause and really take in this timeline for a second, because it is wild. In the span of just over 30 years, Austria goes from being a massive empire to being defeated in World War I to becoming this tiny, fragile republic that's forbidden from uniting with its German neighbors. But it doesn't stop there. Then you get a civil war, an actual fascist dictatorship, then you're annexed by Nazi Germany, and finally, total defeat and occupation by the Allies. It's just this dizzying, brutal cascade of events.
So let's stop on that one term for a second, the Anschluss. Now, this wasn't an alliance or a partnership. This was the complete absorption of Austria into Nazi Germany. In March of 1938, for the first time in its incredibly long history, Austria as a country was just wiped off the map.
Now this number, this is where the story gets really complicated and honestly pretty shocking. The official result of the referendum on uniting with Germany was 99.73% yes. Now, of course, the vote was held under massive Nazi pressure and propaganda, no question. But, and this is a huge but, historical accounts are clear that there was also enormous, genuine popular support for the Anschluss. For a lot of Austrians, this was the dream, the unification of all German-speaking people. And that fact makes the simple story of Austria, the victim, so much more complicated.
But then, out of the absolute ashes of war and occupation, something pretty remarkable happened, a total reinvention. After a full decade under Allied control, Austria was finally given a chance to start fresh, to build a completely new identity from the ground up.
And this is the magic number, the key year, 1955. After years and years of tough negotiations, the Allied powers, that's the US, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France, they finally signed the Austrian State Treaty. All the occupation troops packed up and left, and just like that, Austria was a fully sovereign, independent country once again.
So how did they pull this off, right in the middle of the Cold War? They did it with a promise, a huge one. Austria wrote perpetual neutrality right into its constitution. It declared to the world it would never join a military alliance like NATO or the Warsaw Pact. That was the price of freedom, and it became the absolute bedrock of its new identity.
And you've got to understand, this wasn't just some clever political move. It was a deep psychological shift for the whole country. Austria made a conscious choice to turn its back on its grand imperial past and its very complicated German identity.
It chose a totally new role for itself, to be a mediator, a meeting place, a stable, peaceful bridge between a divided East and West.
So, after all that history, all that turmoil, what kind of country emerged? Let's take a quick snapshot of modern Austria. Okay, so looking at religion today, you can really see that mix of history and the modern world. Its deep Catholic heritage, a direct legacy of the Habsburgs, is still the largest group by far. But you also see a big chunk of the population with no religion, and a growing diversity of other faiths, which really speaks to its role now as a modern international country.
And when you look at the numbers, the economic story is just, well, it's an incredible success. I mean, for a relatively small country, look at this. It has the 13th highest GDP per capita in the world and a very high human development index. By pretty much any standard, it's one of the most prosperous and stable places on Earth.
And yet, even today, that old empire casts a pretty remarkable light. That incredible cultural explosion that happened when Vienna was the center of everything, it never really left. You know, from the music of Mozart and Strauss to the mind-bending physics of Schrödinger and the psychology of Sigmund Freud, Austria's intellectual and artistic legacy is still shaping our world in huge ways.
So when you step back and look at the whole story, from a sprawling empire through these devastating crises to a prosperous, neutral state, Austria's journey is just a powerful lesson in how a nation can totally reinvent itself. And it makes you think, right? In our world today, with all its changing alliances and new challenges, you have to wonder, what will Austria's next chapter be?